Good evening. We're going to start with Lesson 8. I can use understanding of fraction equivalence to investigate decimal numbers on the place value chart expressed in different units. So basically we're going to be looking at something like 2/10 is equal to 20 hundredths. So we're going to be playing with some area models and some place value charts to kind of practice this idea. So let's look at 2.4, which really says 2 4/10. There's 2 wholes, and to the right of that decimal is the 4, which is in the 10ths place. So how would that look like when we were to represent that using this model with these 3 squares? So, well, we have 2 wholes. So we are going to have to fill up 1 hole, 2 holes. Now we do not have 3 holes. We have 4/10 of this hole. So what we need to do is we need to break this last square up into tenths. All right, so now we have 2 holes, and we have another square that we need to represent 4/10. So that third square is cut up into tenths. These are cut up in tenths also, but they make holes because we're shading in all the tenths, the whole tenths that's been cut up. So now let's shade in 4/10 of this square. So I see a little opening, so that means it's going to bleed through. So I'm going to close that up. All right, so let's fill it in. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 4/10. So this is what 2 4/10 look like. But let's say now I want to represent how 2 4/10 can shown in as the hundredths. So what we have to do is we have to cut up our tenths into another tenth, which represents hundredths, because 10 times 10 is 100. Okay, so now I have cut up, to save time, I cut up each one of these squares into hundredths. So now what is shaded in? Well, we have got shaded in here 10/10. It was 10/10, right? But now we've got 100 out of 100. See how those are equivalent fractions because they both equal a whole. 10/10 it was originally, and then now, because I cut it up into another tenth, we made it into 100 hundredths. Then before, we had 4/10, but now, notice we have 10, 20, 30, 40. We have now 40 hundredths. So how does that look like now as a complete into the hundredths? Well, we have 100th plus 100th plus 40 hundredths. And if we equal all of that up, we would have 240 hundredths. So this is all equal to 240 hundredths, which really, how many holes do we see in that? Well, we've got 2 holes, which is really just telling us 2, right? We can pull it out, 2 and 40 hundredths, which is equal to 2 4/10. It's the same thing. We divide the top and the bottom by 0 like we have done before. We can also say that it is equal to 2 4/10, like we originally started from. All right, so use the area model to represent 220 hundredths and complete the number sentence. So we want to take 220 hundredths and break it down into tenths, then ones, then tenths, and then just getting a decimal from that. So we're going down. So basically it's like we're going to be dividing to get down to tenths. So right now we have 3 area models, and they are broken up into strips of 10. So they're broken up into tenths. So if we were to color in all of this, let's do that. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And let's do the last one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. So now what we want to do is we want to now show what does that look like as a fraction. Well, we shaded in 10 tenths, which equals a whole. And this one represents 10 tenths. All right, but we really don't have 3 wholes here. So if we go back into our original fraction, we're left with 20 here, right? So we would want to just color in 2 strips to represent 2 tenths. So let's do that. Let's shade in only 2 tenths. So let's get, here is a strip, here is a strip. Sorry for my bad coloring. And let's change that to, oops, let's change that. All right, so now what we have is representing 2 tenths. But that's not what the problem is asking us. It's asking us for hundredths. So we want to go back into our area models and now cut them up into hundredths. Okay, so now I've just shaded in, sorry, just drew all the lines to represent hundredths now. So what does this new area model going to look like? Well, it's 100 over 100, which is equal to a whole. Same thing as 10 tenths is equal to a whole. This one is equal to 100 over 100, again, a whole. But now we took those 2 strips that were 2 tenths, and we now made it into 20 hundredths. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take that 100 over 100, and how much do we have? Well, we have 1 whole plus 1 whole plus 20 hundredths, which is really equal to 2 wholes and 20 hundredths. But if I look at 20 hundredths, just like we did in an earlier lesson, we could divide the top and the bottom by what? We can divide it by 10 to bring us down to 2 and 2 tenths. So what is this mixed number 2 and 2 tenths look like as a decimal? Well, we've got 2 wholes and we have a 2 in the tenths place. So now what we need to do is we need to go back to our number sentence and complete it. So how many tenths do we have? Well, we have 22 tenths. We've got 2 ones. We have 2 in the tenths place. Well, and then we put this now together, we get 2 wholes and 2 tenths. Again, if we just wanted to look at this original problem here, we could have used the area models to help us. But if we looked at here and we just divide the top and the bottom by 10, we would have got just 22 tenths without that 0. And then we would say we have 2 ones and we have 2 tenths, which represents 2 and 2 tenths. Okay, so this time we're going to use place value dis to represent the following decompositions. So we have 2 ones and 3 tenths equals how many tenths? So let's start putting these little circles in. All right, so let's put 1, and 2. So we've got 2 ones. And now what we want to do is we want to take those 2 ones and put them into the tenths. Before we do that, let's put the 3 in the 3 tenths. So now we have 2 in the ones and we have 3 in the tenths. And we want to take those 2 ones and convert them into tenths. So what we want to do is we want to move this one and bring it over into the tenths. Well, how many do we have? How many tenths do we have in 1? Well, we have 10. So I am going to make 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 tenths. And then we have our last one to move over. And that one is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So how many do we have? How many tenths do we have? Because that's what the problem is asking you for. Well, we've got 10, 20, and a 3. So we've got 23 tenths. Now, 23 tenths could also be 2 and 3 tenths, 2.3, because this is saying 2 and 3 tenths is equal to 2 and 3 tenths, right? We know that already, which is also equal to 23 tenths, because that is what all of this represents. All right, let's do another one. We have 3 tenths, 3 hundredths is all equal to how many hundredths? All right, so we do not have any ones, we have no wholes, so we're going to go right to the tenths. How many tenths does they say that we have? Well, they have 3 tenths. So we're going to put in 3 tenths. And then now it's asking you, well, how many hundredths? Well, we've got 3 hundredths. 1, 2, 3. So now what each one of those tenths, each one of those has another tenth in it, because 10 times 10 is 100. So if we take this is going to represent 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we have another one that represents another 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then our last 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So how many hundredths do we have? Well, let's see. We have 10, 20, 30, and then 33. So we've got 33 hundredths, which looks like 0, no holes, decimal point, 3 in the tenths, and 3 in the hundredths. 33, because that last 3 is in the hundredths place. 33 hundredths. All right, this next one is 1.3 is equal to how many tenths? So 1 and 3 tenths is equal to just how many tenths? So we got to convert that 1.3 into just tenths. So we're going to try to decompose it. And when we decompose it, 1.3, we are breaking it down, and since we're talking about tenths, let's look at that whole and turn it into a fraction, which represents 10 tenths, because we're talking about the tenths. Then that 3 is in the tenths place, so now we've got 3 tenths. So if we add these up, we now have 13 tenths. All right, so now we have 10.3 is equal to how many tenths? So if we kind of decompose 10 and 3 tenths, we want to say that, because if we multiply 10 times 10, we would have 100 over 10, and then plus the 3 is in the tenths place, so this would equal to 103 tenths. All right, and that can be kind of confusing. So let's try a number chart. So I just made the number chart, and if you notice, I'm not continuing on with the hundredths because it wants us just to stop at the tenths. I have the tens because I have a whole number of 10. And then we have no ones. We have a decimal point. That's where our decimal point is going to go. All right, so let's start filling this in. How many tenths do we have? Well, we've got 3 tenths, How many ones? We do not have any ones. And how many tens do we have? Well, we've got just 1 10. So what we want to do is we want to take each one of those and move it over all to the tenths. So if we cash this 10 into ones, how many do we get? Well, we get 10 ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So now we have 10 ones. Now if we're going to move it over again to the tenths, we cash in each one of those. Okay, so each one of these, oops, I just erased it. Each one of these ones is equal to a 10. So if each one of those ones, we have 10 ones and they're each equal to 10, wouldn't that be 10 times 10? 10 times 10, I don't want to make all 100, I'm just going to write 100. So all of these just got cashed in to make 100. So now how many do we have? Well, we have 100 and we have 3. So 103 tenths, which is the same that we got over here. So 2 different ways of decomposing this is by using the place value chart or just simply decomposing it and breaking it apart. All right, we have 1.3 and we want that to equal the hundredths. So 1 3 tenths and we want to convert it into hundredths. So what we're going to do is we are going to go back to our decomposition. 1 3 tenths, and since we want it into the hundredths, we're going to take that whole and write 100 over 100, because 100 hundredths does equal a whole, and that's what we're changing it into. And then we say 3 tenths, but because we're talking about the hundredths, we want to make this, we could say it's in the tenths, right? That's what that looks like, because the 3 is in the tenths. But we need to multiply another 10 to that, because we're going to the hundredths. So if we multiply by 10, we're going to have a 0 here and a 0 here. So it becomes 130 hundredths. If we add this up, this becomes 130 hundredths. So this is what 1 3 tenths is equal to 130 hundredths. Because that got a little confusing, because over here is 3 tenths. And that's what we did. We had 3 tenths originally. But in order to get to 100, what do we need to do? Well, we need to multiply the top and the bottom by 10 to get 30 hundredths, which is all equal to 130 hundredths. If we wanted to look at this as a place value chart instead of the decomposing, what we can do is we can say, how many ones do we have? Well, we've got 1, 1, and we've got 3 in the tenths. So what we want to do is we want to take each one of those and move them into the hundredths. So if we take one of these away and we move it over to the tenths, how many tenths are just in 1? Well, we've got 10, because 10 tenths is 1. 1, 2, 3, wait, what am I doing? 1, 2, 3, so we got 5 and another 5. So we've got 10 and 13. So we have 13, and now what we're doing with that 13 is we're going to move the 13 into the hundredths. So when we do that, we are multiplying by another 10. So now what we have, because each time we go over, we're moving up to a 10. So we're going up, and now we have how many? Well, we had 13. Because we're multiplying by 10, we're adding another 10 to that. We've got 130 hundredths, which is the same as what I had over here when we did the decomposition. So 2 different ways of solving this type of problem. All right, let's look at this chart. We started off right here with 4 1/10. 4.1 of the decimal looks like this as a mixed number, 4 1/10. The 1 is in the tenths place, and we have 4 wholes. But now it would look like if we said tenths now. 41 tenths. Well, we get 41 over 10. And then it's saying, well, how many hundredths? 410 over 100. Because every time we moved it over, we multiplied by 10. We multiply by 10, 41, multiplied by 10, gives us 410. We multiply the bottom by 10, we get 100. So what would it look like if we do 5.3, or 5 3/10? Well, 5 3/10 looks like 5 and 3 over 10. That's what the mixed number looks like. How would it look like now as the tenths? Well, 53 tenths, which would look like 53 over 10. All right, but now we're going over to the hundredths. What is it going to look like? Well, every time we move it over, we are multiplying by 10 to get this next place. So once we do that, we are multiplying 53 times 10, which would be 530 hundredths. And that looks like 530 over 100. Every time we move it, we're multiplying by 10. And this last one, we got 68 wholes and 5/10. So what does it look like as a mixed number? Well, when we change it into a mixed number, we get 68 and 5/10. The fraction is 5/10. Now, what is it going to look like as tenths? Well, we just take 685 over 10. And then if we continue to do it, what would it look like as a hundredths? Well, just like I said before, we multiply the top and the bottom by 10. And now what we're going to get, wow, look at this, 6,850 hundredths. Wow, that's a big one, right? So this is how we're basically doing it, dividing by 10, multiplying by 10 as we're moving back and forth. With plus math equals I can. I know you guys can do it. This can get tricky, but I know if you keep practicing, you will get it. All right, so let's try the next couple of problems. And I know the force is strong with you guys, so good luck. All right, your decimal is 10.9, 10 and 9/10. Put it into a mixed number, then change it into a tenths and make it into a hundredths. So it's going to be 3 choices you have to choose from. Convert 2 and 6/10 just into tenths. You could use the the place value chart. You can do decompose the 2.6, whatever works best for you. And your last one, 2.6, make it into hundredths. You know what? Yes, you can. I knew you guys could do it. It's all about what you tell your mind. I can do it. Keep up the great work and have a wonderful night.